country or a continent. Do you think these books at least have that role of trying to educate the West?
For me, it's just an attitude that metaphorically is captured by this. I mean, the continent is there for the taking. I did say in the earlier panel that, and I enjoyed quoting that a society that refuses to argue with itself is a bad society. We have just created, for me, the basic problem is simply that I think we created a vacuum. And also, in addition to those vested interests, they have decided to cash into it. Whether you like it or not, Africa provides an exciting narrative. But the problem is that instead of telling the stories as they are, I mean, these things are warped or, I mean, depending on the interest which you're coming from. For example, one of the points I want to have said about America, I did not say was, I mean, just to answer the earlier question you asked about whether you're located in Africa and outside, what difference it makes. Somebody depends on secondary sources for most of his write-ups, and that explains why he thinks the General Oladipo here is late. And of course, all he sees everywhere is hopelessness. While the Michael Peel will say, well, while to the outside world, Africa looks hopeless, but the average man he sees on the street is full of hope. He writes on his no condition is permanent. I mean, something happens, he finds an answer to it quickly, he finds a way around it. So basically, it's a very difficult thing to say about what informs why the writer does it. But basically, I think we created a problem. And that is that because we don't write or engage ourselves enough about those issues that are germane about our country and our continent, I mean, anybody will have done what they are doing.
Yeah, well, the question you asked, are these books useful to us? Yes, they are, if only for the fact that they create a narrative for which there needs to be a counter-narrative. The question is, do we create that counter-narrative? I have 4 books on my shelf that are mentioned by Caucasians. I have only one by an African, Wole Soyinka, Burden of Memory, Muse of Forgiveness. I am hoping I can buy Mamdani at this book fair. Because one of the problems I have with that narrative that comes from out there is that even when they have the best of intentions, they can hurt us. It was at Odi Afeyimon's 60th birthday lecture that Mahmoud Mamdani said something that initially sounded strange to me. He was very critical of donor aid. He was very critical of aid coming in from the West. And I was coming from a point of view of, isn't this better than loans, IMF and World Bank? But thinking about it, and this is one of the things that Michael Arong also addresses, this do-goodism can actually hurt us, and it's important for us to create that counter-narrative. One of my biggest problems with John Campbell, apart from the errors of fact, I mean, any Igbo reader who picks up John Campbell and finds him saying that the Igbo business acumen was nurtured by their exposure to colonial education, I'm sure any Igbo guy who reads that will want to slap the guy, because I honestly do not see, I think it's something that antedates whatever colonial experience the Igbo people had. And several other errors of fact along the way. I have some listed that we can talk about. But what are his motives? From the very first paragraph of the preface, he tells us America should pay attention to Nigeria because of oil, because of regional stability, and because of their contribution to peacekeeping efforts. How about the poor in Africa? How about corruption? How about per capita income? How about healthcare? How about education? It's not their problem. It is because of their own interests that they should pay attention, and that is exactly what is happening oftentimes, and that is actually why I have a problem with books like that.
I don't really think it's a problem of America to be concerned about your healthcare here. They have their own issues concerning healthcare or poverty care. It's not their problem really. And this goes from, in my opinion, from country to country. Every country really protects its own interests in your country. They protect their own citizens in your country. Why should we think that America or Britain is concerned about the poor man who are the freedom fighters by the Midwest fighting for? What's their name? The guys who carry guns and bandoliers of ammunition around the Midwest. No Boko Haram. Never the Boko Haram. Pardon? No, the ones in the Midwest, the Niger Delta. Man, yes. I mean, why? Well, that's how old I am. Sorry. To the purists. Right. So, I mean, what America's concern really? That is the way countries are. The reason you block Nigerians from entering Britain without visas is because you are interested in the integrity of your own country. So it doesn't matter if we are dying at their gates because we are economic refugees. If you don't have a reason, I mean, if you feel sorry for the whole of the world, even if you feel sorry for everybody here, you're going to go home broke. So it is not America's business. This points you have made are true. You will protect your interests because of the oil. We know why France led the raid into Libya a few months ago. We know why Sarkozy led the raid. The European Union is falling apart. So they need help from wherever they can get it. And Libyan oil is as good as any. France did that the same thing to Egypt in 1958 or 59 or something when Nasser sank 57 ships in the Suez Canal. You know, so I think we are being very highfalutin and very intellectual here, where we imagine they must have noble reasons. If my child is in your school, I will come to see what kind of teachers you have. If I give you a business, if I have a business in your home, I will come to see what kind of shops, what kind of security is there. I will protect my interests if there's a riot on your street. We shouldn't look for noble reasons. The world is an economic place. The world is a place of business. The world is a place of money. It's a place about affluence. That's my opinion. So these guys will write, and they'll write from their own perspective, the same way CNN does it. When Yaradua was dying, or was dead and we didn't know, and his wife held power for a short while. The CNN correspondent in Lagos, in Nigeria, approached me and told me to do a sketch for him. He would film a sketch at Obalende. I think he's still here. A sketch at Obalende where we will show Yaradua on his deathbed with what's his wife's name, Turai, the woman that became famous there. With Turai holding on to the keys of power, and there was a military strongman there. Well, Turai will hold on to the keys of power, and Jonathan will stretch his hands, trying to reach it, but he wouldn't be able to. At that time, nothing had been resolved. But I think fundamentally, he probably spoke to an adult. Because I wondered, if I want to tell this story, I will tell it under my own steam, based on the way I feel about our country. Apart from the fact that I was smart enough to know that they'll probably shoot me at the Ballet if I attempted to do any kind of drama they are showing Yaradua on the deathbed. He said it didn't matter, he would do it elsewhere and film it. This was a direct conversation between he and I. I did not do that. But I understood his motives. He was here to protect his country. He was here to protect his country's interests. We shouldn't think that anything is noble. The Nigerian High Commission is in the United States or in Britain or in France to protect the interests of its people. It is not a world where expected to be. I owe you no obligation to be kind to you, except maybe we attend the same church. I owe you no obligation to give you money. If the chairman of Ana Lagos is dying, I am under no obligation to help him out of whatever situation he is in. It is the way of the world. We should not look for noble. It has never been that way. Nobody has entered this country, whether under the guise of Christianity or Islam, purely to save souls. there's money behind it. And that's not sacrilege. I'm a Christian.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, I think this example that Wale has given actually illustrates what we're saying. Wale did 4 things. Who is talking to me? What is he saying? Where is he coming from? How do I respond to what he is saying? This guy is a CNN journalist who wants me to stage a play somewhere. He wants me to do it to pander to certain interests, and I reject that. That is exactly the point we're saying. And that's what we're saying about all these texts, that for us, the 4 things that we need to do when we pick up any of these books is just that. 1, who is doing the writing? Where is he coming from? What is he saying to me? And how do I respond to this? Not every book panders to their interests. I don't know how many people have read Mikel Arong. One of the fantastic things about this book is that it takes the whole idea of corruption and addresses it from many layers. It starts from the consciousness, the tribal consciousness that generates this is our turn to eat mentality. And I have a very interesting Freudian oral infantile fixation approach to that, but we'll not go into that. But one of the things that she does talk about also is when these people come and they want to give aid, that is what they want to do for us. And that is what they have often done, and it is supposed to be good. But aid does not always help. Sometimes aid hurts us. And she gives instances for Wolfowitz, the World Bank, the DFID, and the consequences, the deleterious consequences, how aid in Kenya actually helped to perpetuate poverty, to perpetuate corruption in Kenya. She itemizes that brilliantly. So that it is okay if they and we don't have to mount a rest. You have to say why. And I have I respect this book because it's a very good example of creative journalism. If it is just literature that doesn't have any consequences, fine. If John Campbell's book doesn't have any influence on policy, fine. We can just read it and whatever his motives are, it does not matter. But if we have to respond to narratives like John Campbell, if we have to respond to John Campbell, then we have to decide, okay, so how do we respond to this? What will be the consequences of this narrative for us? That's the point that we're making. Thank you.
We're just saying goodbye to Wale. He's to rush off. He's done 2 panels, so we wish him well. Did I see? I think we're generating now some interest from the floor, so we'll come back to our panelists, but let's feel free to take some comments from the floor as well. I don't know, Toyin, do we only have 1 microphone or do we have another one?
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, first, let me confess that I'm not a very appropriate person to speak here because I have lost out on reading in the last 30 years. And the only reason I'm here is I'm giving serious consideration to Toyin Akinwusio's invitation to go back to reading. But the curiosity that I have comes from the comment by shared about I need some help to understand what is wrong with that, because before my generation lost out on reading 30 years ago when we left university, there was this upsurge in literature, and that is what led to the popularity of the Soyinkas, the Achebes, to the extent that for those of us who went to university in the mid-70s, if you read English or you were in the humanities, you read mainly African literature, African poetry, because that was what made sense, and there was the negritude movement, and so in all of Anglophone and Francophone Africa, it was all this African theme. Now, what has come out of that, beyond the fact that we have great writers, how has their writing affected society? that today, 30 years later, we sit here criticizing those who have taken the issues in their society, have used it to transform the society, and continue to use the issues in their society as the theme of their writing in order to affect the world. And yet, we make comments about WikiLeaks in writing when what we need is more of those kind of things. Number two is that I think the challenge for your generation, and most of the generation here, is to make the theme of the writings today and the critique of those writings more relevant to society. Quran says it's Committee for Relevant Act. Good, and that's part of the reason we are here. But those of you who are critics too need to begin to examine, I think, the need to begin to write some of those criticisms and take it beyond fora like this. I don't know if that makes sense, but thank you.
Like, well, you're a literary critic. You've been doing that for many years. I guess you would have been there with some of the early works, and now we've seen younger writers who are writing. What is their impact? Do you see an impact, and is it their role to try and have an impact on society, or are they just writing to explore some emotional brink?
Now, if we go into this argument, we do not end here, because there are different positions about what the role of the writer ought to be. I am not of the school of thought that believes we should legislate about how a writer should write. What we need to talk about, if we seriously have a concern about people's response to books, is to address those issues. We've said it more than 50 times here today. The problem of Nigeria basically is systemic. I mean, no matter how we write. I mean, I tell people it's not exactly true that Nigerian literature is alive and well, to quote Kesariwa. People are writing, and they are writing very fantastically well. But you see, it's not the place of the writer. He's done his own bit of it. Somebody else, it's a chain. Some other people should do what they want to do. I mean, walk into the bookshop, you feel you have a strong urge to read a book. I mean, if the system makes it impossible, impoverishes the writer or the critical establishment, and people who are not reading, well, it's not, for me, it's not the problem of the writer. I am not of the school of thought to say, well, this is what the writer ought to write about. The years we're talking about that Nigerian literature was flourishing, people were reading. I am not sure writers went out of their way to hawk their books as if they are selling gala. It was just that the educational system had not collapsed. It is not the state in which it is today. I mean, I remember I keep telling younger ones that the secondary school I attended, reading was a subject, apart from English as a subject. And I was forced to read at least a book a week. And every book, I had to do a summary, meaning that the teacher also had read those books, otherwise she would not be able to mark those books. Can we say the same about the kind of system we run today? And if you have products of a system where even the teachers themselves are strangers to books, that's the kind of result you get. So no matter how well our writers are doing, no matter how well even the critical establishment responds to these books, people that will read, those that will not read, will not read.
Okay, well, if I can respond to that in less than a minute. This is a book festival. Okay, so it's not a forum of journalism. So the interest is not just in the content, the text of what is being said, but the way it is passed across to us. Leko Yegoke did a very interesting essay on the NLNG awards thing, and he talked about failure of literature or failure of criticism. Maybe Nigerian literature is having some form of life. I am not as worried about Nigerian literature as I am about Nigerian criticism. Criticism gives the criterion. We're not just interested in what has been written. We're interested in how it has been written. We cannot legislate for the writer that you must write about this thing. If you choose, you can write about sex. If you choose, you can write about Uganda. If you choose, you can write about animal husbandry. But every book has to be judged on its own terms. first we ask ourselves, what does this aspire to? Does it aspire to be poetry? Does it aspire to be fiction? Does it aspire to be creative non-fiction? And then we judge it on its own terms and we say, what is the criterion for creative non-fiction? And the reason why I am very dismissive of John Campbell is that I take it as a work which I struggle to call creative non-fiction. And I put it beside a book like this, which I can wholeheartedly recommend as an example of fantastic creative non-fiction. And I say that John Campbell's book, apart from it having questionable motives, is banal. That is why I'm dismissive about it.
Okui, would you like to comment on that, or shall I move and see what somebody else on the floor would like to say? Or would you like to comment on that? Okay. I'm an old man, so you can come close.
My name is Chris. My name is Chris Hidero. I wish we were still here. Two things quickly. First and foremost, on the reasons why they write and whatever is behind the writings and all. I don't mind an agenda. I don't even mind an agenda that is purely capitalist or whatever you want to put behind it. I absolutely don't mind. And I was wondering if they have actually not moved away from this agenda setting. This is why this and all of that. It's fine. People say if you do not blow your own trumpet, someone will blow a whistle on your behalf. And I don't care how someone wants to tell my story. I am more interested in how I am telling my own story. And I think that's the larger failure. The larger failure is we are not engaging our own stories, whether positively or negatively. I mean, I don't mind to see someone do a good job trying to talk about something, even if there are failings therein. I am content with that because the failings, I mean, criticism is what? It builds from one to the other. So you would have classicism and then neoclassicism and then modernism and then postmodernism and then colonialism and then post. I mean, there's always a pre and post in criticism anyway. So we are going to get something even out of the failings. However, we also should not leave the impression that merely by being African, which is accidental, isn't it? I mean, I didn't choose to be Nigerian. If I had a say, I wouldn't have been. I mean, if God had asked me or whatever brought me here that this is what your country is going to look like by the time you're 25, would you go? I would say no. I mean, I would go to Singapore. I would go to Switzerland. I don't have any of those patriotic, blah Nigerian things. I don't have it. Yeah. Therefore, by being African doesn't mean you can tell the African story better. It doesn't mean you have prerequisite knowledge to tell the African story. And we live in a knowledge-driven world right now. And distance has been contrasted. Therefore, you could sit in London and actually know a lot more that's happening in Lagos, Nigeria than someone who is right on the street where it's happening. Therefore, we can't say by being African or by living in Africa, therefore, you are probably in a better position to talk about Africa. Absolutely not. Because a lot of Africans themselves are bloody ignorant about their own realities. So, I don't mind who writes, and I don't mind where the books come from, and I don't mind the agenda. It's all good. Alright? What I mind is that what Nero was talking about, what's the counter discourse then? What is it that we are saying? Read our newspaper. I mean, columnists are very important everywhere. They are opinion makers. They help you to reach a conclusion about some things, even if finally it's your conclusion. But read our newspapers here. Our columnists themselves have agendas. The agendas lately seem to be to write well enough to get them into the corridors of power. Abuse the person in power long enough so that when the next one comes in, you have to be a part of the kitchen cabinet. That looks like the current agenda. So that's one. Secondly, I wanted to also say, which is what I wish Wole was here about. Yeah, so everybody came and they had an agenda and it was driven by capitalism and they didn't bring faith and all of that, and someone was always going to make money out of all of this. Big deal. We went to Liberia and lost soldiers. We went to Sierra Leone and lost soldiers. What did Nigeria get out of it? Oh, so France is doing something in Libya because of oil. Bloody hell. What did we get out of Liberia? What did we get out of Sierra Leone where we lost our citizens in thousands? What did we get? I wish we got something. It's a business world after all.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go first of all with the chap with the striped t-shirt, and then with the gentleman with the beige shirt.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I will talk because we talked partly to our question. Very simple. Normally, all these books will have more ratings which of these books you recommend for Nigerian people outside as well as research about Nigeria's aspects because it has discussions in every book. That's a fact. There are discussions in all books. As we said, even in the Western world, we live on the internet and all these things. I some very statistics of kids that
No, just walk across. Yeah, for the camera.
it's a culture of people that brings subscribe to us. Subscribe and there's a big difference. So, which one do we need that? There are so many distortions in things.
Very good question, interesting, and I think we'll have one answer on my right.
Well, the answer is this. The answer is neither here nor there. One of the things we were talking about is diverse perspectives that each writer has brought to bear in his book. Now, if you're in the diaspora and you're conducting a research about Nigeria, now because you're doing a research, there's a large collection of books on the subject you're addressing, which you need to consult. Now, in doing that, the truth of the matter is this: every conclusion has a direction it is headed for. If you've written a thesis and you draw your conclusion is a byproduct of certain analysis. Maybe you're proposing you're proposing socialism rather than capitalism. Okay? There must be a judgment that comes from the writer, and that judgment must have been informed by certain factors. If you look at John Campbell's book, for instance, although there are historical inaccuracies in that book, but there are also facts that could be gleaned from it. And I did, let me read a passage from it where it says, Nigerians have mastered the art of dancing on the precipice without falling over, convinced that Nigeria is too big to fail. And I will ask, are we? Is that really true? Are we too big to fail? And I did talk about Olusegun Adeniyi's article, captioned, "It can never happen here." And Nigerians felt suicide bombing can never happen here because perhaps we are the happiest, we look at ourselves that we're the happiest people on earth and we love life so much. For that reason, no Nigerian in the right frame of mind want to start bomb and commit suicide. But today, what is happening? What is playing itself out? Our security forces don't seem to have an answer to that. So again, I say it's neither here nor there. But in doing your research, it is there for you to glean from the collection of books or materials at your disposal what you think reflects the fact or comes close to reflecting the fact. Every book, there is no book that is perfect. Every book has its own drawbacks. It's subjective to, critical analysis. You will find one flaw or the other. But again, the onus is on you to show what I would call intellectual vigilance by subjecting each conclusion to the minutest possible of analysis to establish, to separate the chaff from the grains. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we'll get all the panelists to respond to this.
Yeah, well, I don't believe in sitting on the fence. Let's ask ourselves 2 questions. What is the purpose of literature? Second question, what is the purpose of criticism? In a decadent society where you find that probably there has been a downturn in the literary consciousness, there is always this tendency for people not to even understand why it is being done. Why do we do literature? Everybody that is here either as a producer or a consumer of literature. What is the value of literature? And to summarize, I probably would suggest that the purpose of literature, the value of literature to us, is because we feel it can affect us one way or the other. Either because it shapes our consciousness, or it gives us pleasure, or it educates us, or entertains, or whatever. It does something to us. What is the value of criticism? The value of criticism, I suggest, is to help us to discriminate. I like that at the time when the modernist movement was in the offing, T.S. Eliot started a poetry journal and called it Criterion. What was it about? How do we tell which poem is good and which is not? That is the value of criticism. How do we discriminate? Everybody writes poetry. How do we tell which, like Transformer, is worthy of a Nobel and which is best only for rapping akara? The same thing for creative non-fiction. How do we know which is worth your time? There are 1,000 books on any subject. How do you tell which is worth your time? How do you tell which you shouldn't even give a second look at? That is the purpose of criticism. And how is criticism done? There has to be criteria. A writer can do whatever it is that he wants to do, like I said. But each book has to be judged on its own terms based on what it seeks to do. We all, for the individual, we say literature affects consciousness. So it is important to us, whether we believe it or not, what we read shapes our consciousness. What we watch shapes our consciousness. Alright? And then for a society, books of a certain sort influence policy. That is why it is important to us that we have a critical attitude to whatever it is that is coming from wherever it is. It's not just the Westerners that are writing about Africa. In Codesria, they have a network of intellectuals that are writing, Africans writing about Africa. And like I've already mentioned, Shurinka, I've mentioned Mamdani. There are Africans who are writing about Africa. Maybe they outnumber us by a ratio or whatever. Alright, but even Africans writing about Africa have to be judged critically. What do we take away from this? Books like John Campbell create the Okonjo Iwealas that in a world where corruption has not been addressed, want to rip off the populace even more by removing fuel subsidy. It is the narratives like John Campbell that create people like Okonjo Iweala, that creates people like Alassane Ouattara, because they are shaped by that discourse. We need to understand where they're coming from. Everybody is coming from a theoretical perspective, from a template. Alright? It is not just the facts. It is the facts as presented through a prism. So it helps us, even if we're going to fold our arms and say we do not mind. Because, like one of my friends said, if you say the price of oil is 150 naira per barrel, 150 naira per liter, petroleum or petrol is 150 naira per liter, you would find people who live in Okoyi who would feel it is tush, that they can afford it. But they're just a layer of society. The overwhelming majority of Nigerians cannot afford that tushness. So it is important that the books that shape that discourse, because these are the people who influence policy. I've already talked about how she talked about Paul Wolfowitz and the World Bank, and how there was an opinion about aid and DFID, and how people try to do a certain thing. It's okay if it is just something I would sit down and read and enjoy and it ends there. But if it shapes my consciousness in a certain way, I should be aware that my consciousness is being shaped in a certain way. And if it shapes my society in a certain way, I like something that Pius Adesanya said, that his primary responsibility to this society is to think for this society, because you will find that the overwhelming majority do not either have the acumen or do not have the luxury of being able to think for themselves and influence policy. Alright, so if it is certain that certain books come from a certain perspective, what should our perspective be? We ought to do what Wale said he did. Somebody wants me to stage a play. Who is he? What is he asking me to do? Why is he asking me to do it? Am I going to do it or not? Those are the 4 things that I think should govern our response to books of this sort. Thank you.
Well, without repeating what everybody has said, what is very germane is developing the necessary critical consciousness to the books that come your way. Again, I am very any form of prescription.
If you go through these diaries, you know to what extent the Arab world has also contributed to our predicament. But that's not even the major issue here. We're saying that Nigerians, Africans will write about themselves. What is the environment in which the African is expected to write? Believe this or not, very often I have to go outside Nigeria to be able to write. I have a book here that was published last year. To finish my book, I practically relocated to Benin Republic because of electricity. I'm not kidding. So, why would somebody want to write or even read when he sees that those who have written and those who are wearing are not even employed? The situation is very, very deep. Very, very deep. So deep that we cannot sit down here and just read books and think we've taken the entire picture. It's very serious, these issues we are talking about. The government itself has practically policy where they more or less made it impossible for people to Mushi and Shomolu and find out the prices of printing items. What does it cost to publish a book in Nigeria? The publishers of all these 4 books we're talking about, are they Nigerian? We have publishing houses in Nigeria, but they don't publish books except these are on the syllabus. So if you come up with a subject that's not on the syllabus, who's going to publish you? I had to publish myself because the subject I chose to write about is not a very popular subject, but it's very important. So these are many of what a few of the very many issues, affecting issues that plague Africa. Let's not just talk about the West versus the rest of us. There's the East, there's the Middle East. When we talk about slavery, it's always the transatlantic slave trade. How about the trans-Saharan slave trade? So we have to look at the larger picture. And then when you talk about people who come and stay here 3 years and they think they've mastered the African environment. Yes, I mean, it's a Janus Space thing. You can stay in Nigeria for 40 years and not know much about the country. I've spoken to countless Nigerians who are very, very ignorant about their country. And the same applies even to Americans. I'm not trying to denigrate anybody. If you've lived in America, you will see people who stay in Mississippi. They don't give a damn about what happens in Washington, D.C. They don't know what happens. Somebody talked about Midwest here. How come Michigan is considered Midwest? If you look at geography, does Michigan fall under the geographic Midwest of America? These are some of the things we have to look at critically. So I think I want to give up.
Thank you. While we're on that topic, I think Toyin has remained silent for some time. Feels he wants to comment.
I really don't have to say anything because we already selected the best heads to come and have this conversation, so we don't need to intervene. What I wanted to say when I had my very good friend, Mr. Achibong, who has just published this book on museums in Nigeria, what I wanted to say when I had him say that we're focusing on the West is this. The theme last year, because we were 50 as a nation, we needed to talk with ourselves. So the books that formed the colloquium were essentially more of creative non-fiction and fiction that Nigerians have written. So you had Shoinka's You Must Set What Had Done, you had Half of a Yellow Sun. We thought that we needed an internal conversation, you know, and so a whole lot of these books, Saolani Wajai's book, you know, which was basically about how, how the British rigged Nigeria's first elections and what has happened years after. So there are books, that are also British fiction of sorts. So we were talking. So we thought that, on the occasion of, and because it was just about a month and a half after our 50th year anniversary as a country, so we didn't have anybody coming from outside that we discussed. But at the point, you cannot run away from the fact that there's this growing basket of creative non-fiction types on the continent and investigative journalism. The kind of books that, if we were doing those things ourselves, will be the stuff that you can allude to what Dagatola used as a theme in one of the ANA panels that said, is literature failing Nigeria or failing the economy or the economy failing literature? Those kind of books are not being written by Africans, and we need to do so. When we make examples of this, we're pointing attention to their non-occurrence, in the African context. That's all I wanted to say, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Doyen.
We're going to soon round up, and to beg, you'll be very patient. We'd like for you to wait. We were having a reducing. We're going to serve some light food and drinks, and we're not trying to vibe you. We're trying to, because the next panel is a very critical panel, and the conversation, in that is around, African writers. They are, the cities in Africa, and they are very important too. And we'd like you to stay and be part of that. We're very happy that you've been here. So, and this is almost an all-female panel, except that there's just one man. And this has been largely, this is all male, and that's awesome. This time, it's an all-female, very powerful, Dagatola is the only one who is Thank you.
Thank you. Toyin, in fact, you just took the wind out of my sails, because I was going to say, as we move towards rounding up, I was going to ask for at least one question or response from some of the females in the audience, as we have a very male-dominated panel here. And my belief is any discussion is always one-sided if we don't have a female perspective. So there's a few ladies. Is there anyone who has a question or a comment they would like to make before I ask our panelists to make a few closing remarks each? You're all remaining very silent. Well, that's your right. Just Toyin, next time I beg, let me have at least, not surround me with just with men. Even though they're intelligent and articulate, and I'm sure they're good looking, it's always nice, So thanks very much. I'm just going to ask the panelists just to say a few words, how they felt some of the dialogue's gone, whether it's had an impact on them, if there's any remaining views they have, and then I will just take the chairman's prerogative maybe to round up. So this time I'll start at the other extreme.
Well, there's hardly anything I want to add other than the fact that we need to continue with this constant engagement with the book. And because, as emphasized time and time over again, it's what shapes our consciousness. And as I did recommend to Cora, a very good way of getting value for discussions such as this is to have one or two critical reviews by which the panelists who have equally engaged the book will now respond to. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I started on a very general note talking about very broad things. So, in ending, I would like to talk about this book. I'm glad that Tony Akosho asked me to read it. I actually first came across this book when Mikel Aron was in the country like a few years back, but I didn't buy it. Now, my own consciousness, I just saw the author's name, Mikel Aron. What kind of name is that? That's wrong, you know. But I'm happy that I finally read the book. Like I have said, it's a fantastic example of investigative journalism. It's a fantastic example of creative non-fiction. What does it do? It addresses corruption from many dimensions. It tells one individual's story, a major protagonist, and then you have a minor protagonist, really. And then she looks into his antecedents. What are the things about him that turned him into a whistleblower against his own people? And then against what background did all these things happen? What were the ethnic dynamics that shaped the corrupt practice that you have in Kenya, and his response to that? What was the international framework within this corruption was being perpetuated? She did a fantastic job talking about DFID, talking about the World Bank, talking about good intentions that had deleterious effects. So I feel in terms of creative non-fiction and investigative journalism and addressing the question of corruption in a particular society, she did that very well. I think one other thing that she managed to pull off is that she was talking as a friend, because she's actually John Githongo's friend, but she talked warts and all like a frank friend. All his issues, all his problems, she brought them out dispassionately. And in one of the online forums, there was an argument recently about Padi criticism. Oh, this person is my friend, so I don't want to talk about the bad things. No. The best thing you can actually do in this kind of world is to be objective. And I think she did that very well. It's a slice of John Githongo's life. It's a personal tragedy, really, if you think about it. You talk about what are the elements that make tragedy. Hubris. The whole idea of a tragic flaw. You have an individual who is naive, who takes upon, in Greek tragedy, it was the gods. In this book, it was the House of Mumbi, the elders from Mount Kenya, a force that antedated him, a force that was there before he came, and a force that was going to outlive him, but he was naive enough, foolish enough, like every tragic hero, to take on that enterprise. So he dealt his own one blow, but of course, it was an effort in which he was destined to fail. Okay, the whole story ends not with a bang but with a whimper, as it were. So it's a personal tragedy. I like that aspect of it. It is well written. And like any good tragedy, it actually ends with hope. Okay, I said there was a minor character, David Moniaki, who is actually also like a hero that came before John Githongo, but he died of pneumonia. And I like something that Shoyinka said, the very last lines of Death and the King's Horseman. Tragedy, it's tragic, but it actually ends with hope. He said, forget the dead, forget the living. Think only of the unborn. That's actually what Mikel Aron does in this book. He's living. John Githongo still lives, even though with his tail between his legs. But forget him too. But the things that these people have done, there is actually hope peeping from under the covers. So think about the unborn, that perhaps these things will happen. That is what all great tragedy does. It actually gives you like a small glimmer of hope to hold on to. And for all these very reasons, I think this book is a fantastic book. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, and particularly for the focus on the book in hand. So last but not least, Okwe.
Thank you so much. I would rather say that I have found the dialogue, the exchange this afternoon very stirring, it's been effort-provoking session. I talked about quite briefly Nigeria, Dancing on the Brain by John Campbell, and it's one book I found very interesting. Not because it was written by somebody who has spent several years in Nigeria and then who knows the workings of politics and has been has mingled with those who call the shots in this country, but because there are fundamental issues currently convulsing this country that John Campbell addressed in the book. And what I want to say is this: whatever our misgivings about John Campbell may be, whatever his intentions are, whatever vested interest he's trying to protect, we must not delude ourselves into thinking that he has just engaged in a wasteful exercise. Like I said, some of these issues are playing themselves out now. And there was a prognosis here. And I did say that it will begin from this book. I'm reading from my short summary that over half a century after independence, Nigeria continues to show ominous signs of breaking apart. Ethnic and religious strife, poor governance, nourished by major league corruption, and a mutually sustaining partnership between politics and crime. That, you know, it's something I keep saying that years ago nobody believed we have suicide bombers here, but today it is happening. That's because we just felt it can't be us. It can't happen here. So many things are happening here that we never thought would happen. The US warned about the growing threat of Al-Qaeda in Sub-Saharan Africa. It cited Nigeria. In fact, the CIA actually predicted that I think was it 5 or 10 years Nigeria will break apart. And I did say the signs are there. The signs are there. And if Nigeria gets enveloped in wars between the different ethnic nationalities, that will be the end of the story. And the signs are there. So we must go back and reflect deeply on those issues that are threatening our existence as one country and subject them to serious inquiry. I mean, we need to ask our leaders questions about. We need to hold them accountable to governance, and this is what I think we should take away from here beyond dismissing John Campbell and his tantrums about Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, as I round up, I'd just like to thank the panelists who, I mean, certainly I've been fascinated and gained great insights myself, and to people from the floor for both listening and for contributing. So as I close, I take us back to the original question that I started with, which was, what do they know of us that they are writing? And we've discussed 3 very different books. They've come from different perspectives. They have elicited different responses from different people. But the key theme is those responses have come from their desire to at least open up issues. It may be, we've heard that some of them have come from a different angle, whether it's ever possible for foreigners, for Caucasians to free themselves of their colonial past or perspective. These are all questions, but at the end of the day, they are still stimulating the kind of debate. And as we've just heard, this debate about this nation is still very important. So, as a foreigner in Nigeria who has written, I can say that one of the great things about Nigerians is actually they're ready to accept what a foreigner will say if he says it from at least the perspective of trying to engage in a positive sense in Nigeria. And my sense is, because these 3, to lesser or greater extent, have tried to engage in a positive sense and stimulate issues that are important, their views have at least some validity. And I'm going to finish by, as the moderator, I can at least take advantage of my position. I'm going to quote from the foreword of my own book. The foreword was written by Patrick Delli-Cole, and in his foreword he actually posed the question whether it was right that I, as an expatriate, would be writing in a newspaper and potentially being critical of Nigerian social life or politics and culture. So I'll leave you with the words of my Egbon, Ambassador Patrick Delli-Cole. He said, "The answer to my original question as to whether it is acceptable for an outsider to be holding up the mirror to our society lies therefore more in our inability to submit ourselves to serious self-analysis than in whether it is right for an outsider to take it up." So by that I leave you with the question that I hope some of you here and more Nigerians will take up the pen or the laptop and fill that vacuum which in these circumstances has been filled by non-Africans. Thank you very much indeed.
I want this panel to wait here so I can thank them properly. The first, let me thank Laiwola, who submitted himself. He was the very first person to buy a book for himself, not like other people you were chasing with books. Buy those 2 books. The moment we mentioned to him in July 2011, or was it June, that he was going to, he went to Amazon, and then I quickly said, okay, you can then quickly buy us this. So that's how we started buying books that we distributed. Laiwola, his last job before he went to Chevron was as arts editor of This Day. Thank you very much. He's been on both panels. He's read The State of Africa, which is explained here, and he read A Swamp Full of Dollars. Thank you very much, Laiwola, for being here. He's been on several panels in these kind of gatherings, especially Cora, and was in one of the very early panels that we had in the Book and Art Festival. The first time I met Niran Okewole was about 6-7 years ago, right? When I had to moderate the Muson Poetry Festival. And Niran, I had this panel of judges all over America that were sending emails to each other, and there were tons of works of poetry. Niran was then a student of medicine at the University of Ibadan, and he wrote this poem, Angola, that I couldn't even understand. And those people were so overwhelming in their praise. There were people like Akin Adeshokon, Unoma as well, very critical folks. They don't, let you go off easily. And he beat so many supposedly big superstars. And it wasn't meant to be on this panel. That's what is interesting. I had invited Tade Ikpadeola, who is one of the best reviewers of books you can ever, But when Tade came to bribe me to say he was running out of the country and couldn't do it, he said he'd given it to the best. I said, what can he do in less? We were talking about 6 days ago. And this gentleman had these books for like 4 months, and he was coming to my house, to, sleep in my bed and say that, I didn't know how to kill him or whatever. But look at what he has presented, and look at what's happening here. Now, Okwi is probably the youngest here, and I ran into him only last year. And I was very, very impressed with the work he was doing with Caritas PR. And I don't know of, those kind of people don't come to, corporate types, they don't come here. We can understand, who was from here, so it could take off from Chevron, they are going to penalize him, you can ask me. And come, they don't do those kind of things. But I've been grabbed by the way Dayo Ojo, who is my long-term friend and who speaks about him so effusively about what he could do. And I was in a meeting with Dio one day, and he was asking me about the festival. I just gave him the book, and I was so sure that that book was in a good hand. Thank you very much, Okwi. You're saving the best for the last. Chief Keith Richards was, made chief. The Guardian carried about the page or something, and long before then he had an OBE, which some of the British prime ministers are only probably just getting now. So he's basically been there, done that. And the reason why we chose him, why German insisted that he should be, the chairman of this panel is, his book is actually one of those we should also be talking about. He's been a columnist with Business Day. I think when he didn't have a job, because he finished with, I think you retired, right, properly, from there go, where I first heard about him through this Kelechi Amadiobi, who's become a major photographer. He was one of those people who actually, in quote, discovered Kelechi. He was one who called him and said, I know what you can do. You are going to do our calendar. Right, sir. And so I like to work with legends. And so we sent an email to Chief Keith Richards, and all of us were thinking, well, is the big man going to respond? Is he not going to respond? And one of the things that we try to do is to try and put the things that the moderator would ask. But in the case of Keith, we didn't have to worry about that because, we knew he would steer. He read all the books, and it's not up to a month that we sent those three. So it's for the chief executive of Promasido. And the reason why we were also ambivalent about Promasido ought to be one of the companies we should go for sponsorship. It will look funny if we go and ask him to come, and we now start going to the PR people and saying we want. So we knew we would lose, but we wanted that intellect. And ladies and gentlemen, the man who determines all that L'Oreal that you see, whose company sponsors mathematics competition, that's Keith Richards for you. Thank you very much. It's been a very wonderful panel. We appreciate you. Please be around because your perspectives are very important to the next very significant panel that we're going to call. Well, I'll give the mic to Maga, the program chair of the forum.
Well, I'm just doing the house cleaning in the college. The exhibitors have been asking where they could keep their book. There's a young man called Samuel. Samuel, Osase, please. See Samuel, he will show you the store at the back of the stage there. Actually, for those of us who don't know Freedom Park, that used to be the gallery where they were hanging people. If you remember the story of Aparara, the guy who was accused of killing Injemanze, the musician, that was when he was hanged. There's a lot of story about Freedom Park that we don't know. When you have time, please go into the museum there, you see the chain. I think even the one they use on Awolowo is house there. When they were excavating this place, you saw the chains. And those prisons you see there, those are the cells for Awolowo, Yakonde. I think Zik was there at some point. Most of the journalists were arrested there. So you can understand why we brought this show to this place. There's somebody who can tell the story here because it's part of what's going on there, marking and tell the story of this place. There's a story about this building. Very soon, I'm not the one to say the theory about it. You will get to know about this building. But the work that is going in there is incredible. So we deliberately insisted on bringing, we know the inconvenience is hard, but we need to know that this used to be a prison. A prison. This used to be one of the dark stories of this country. And now it's an open space for free expression. I can relate to this because as a child, as a young man, this was where we were dumping refuse. I don't know how we came to the place where you could dump refuse. We were living at Logo there. We would bring our refuse from there. It's a long distance, but we trek and bring the referees here and dump it here. I don't know why. I need to think through that story. But this was a big, and that's the gallo. Or that used to be the gallo. And now, but if you see under, you go there, you see a space like this. You know, they used to keep people. I'm not sure. Yeah. Anyway, so you see Samuel. Where's Samuel? When Samuel is sitting at the front there, you can tell the exhibitors just go to him and then he take you to keep your things there. So Tony, I can show for you.
Entire import of what occurred in Angola, in Mozambique, with specific reference to Angola, the entirety of the liberation struggle, the coming into power of the MPLA, the so-called lefts coming into power, without a clear understanding that the entire bankruptcy of left politics itself as represented, by the entire failure and distortion that Stalinism itself constitutes as an idea, where you have the state and resources of society nationalized, but without the democratic control of the entirety of the mass of the working people in control. Because in a situation where you have a democratic control, the student in question will be going on here to give his direct comments, and the state itself will not necessarily feel threatened that a 7-year-old school student is coming on national radio to pass what he thinks is his view, and he wants to independently air that view on May Day. No books to point to the failure of oil and its management in the city-states in Nigeria. You begin to see that a book like Good Morning Comrade, begins to document that process. That is something that you cannot ignore. It's something that even Nigerians must have to turn to understand the early process of the oil politics and oil governance in a society like Nigeria. A third take for me for that text is the whole nostalgia about the failure of the emergent African states, where you begin to now have African characters romanticizing, the colonial past as a better period. What is Sam Mbakwe said here in Nigeria, that it pays all of us to have the British return back to governing us. You have this particular character in the text who continues to remember that period, celebrates the state, the structures, the facilities, and suddenly under the controls of the African rulers, these structures are collapsing. Governance is not what it ought to be. So there's an element in which this is also a third, critical element. But ultimately, it raises for me the question of how do we move the city forward? And in moving the city forward, the question of the governance, of the politics and the ideas that must govern, becomes something that you cannot take away, from that process. But in juxtaposing the idea of how the city should function in relation to representing this in existing characters and story is not something that I think the book successfully arrived at. But in terms of raising Luanda as a city, raising the entirety of Africans attempting their own story and presenting the entire disillusion that the mass of the people themselves begin to gradually, in their consciousness, in silence, agree to themselves, even though they are incapable of pronouncing this publicly, given the fact that they are supposed to celebrate that Angola is a state of theirs, Nigeria is our state, is our country. But because this is from Nigeria, we have gone 51 years, so you can necessarily become critical. But in the story, there's this conscious retreat where people begin to see the signposts that things are going the other way around. The courage, the appropriate word is consciousness. The consciousness to now draw the conclusion that you can now begin to blame the ruling elites. You can now begin to blame the failure on the governance is necessarily not there. And this creates why a character in the story begins to look at the rule of the Portuguese in Angola, how society there was more calmer, quote and unquote, outside the entirety of the struggle against bringing an end to colonial rule. Thank you.
It is worth noting that the book, Footballing Comrades, was seen through the eyes of a young boy. So, we love it today with Ola, who read Under the Brown Rusted Roofs, which is illustrated in that. So, do you think that came out as a city, a character in itself, or was it important to the story at all? Did it happen anywhere?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Under the Brown Rusted Roofs by Aduni Adelakun Abimbola. From seeing the title, it was obvious to me that, okay, we are going to Ibadan, thanks to J.P. Clark's poem titled Ibadan. So when I started reading the book, I felt more like a voyeur in this family's home. But for me, Ibadan really wasn't at the beginning, wasn't that obvious. The story could have been set anywhere. It had that universal quality about it. But I think later on, at the point where one of the chief's sons becomes a thug, and when the entire political aspect of the story blows up, there's that obvious throwback to Ibadan and the activities in Ibadan itself. Because we see characters, this particular one is not named, the Adedibu-like character, and the other one like Arishekola Alao. So for me, why Ibadan does not play that much of Ibadan doesn't really come into its own until later on in the book. I would say an aspect of the story was relevant to Ibadan in itself. But if the entirety of the story itself, as I said, could have been set anywhere else. If we look at the universality of characters, like the chief himself, who delves into politics, and the fact that we can see that his house is a polygamous home, where he has, I think, 2 wives. The first one is not overly ambitious, but the second one comes across as hugely ambitious, driven by greed, and the third one, who ends up taking another husband. So the intrigues that play out in the Chief Aribagbo's home could have been set anywhere else. I think looking at how Ibadan is used in Aduni's novel, I can remember, reading something like Dickens, where he only has to explain so little, and I know, I'm in Victorian England. Or reading Wole Soyinka's Ishara, and I know, this is Ogun State. The first time I passed through Ishara, I knew, this was very well presented. But apart from the reference to the brown rusted roofs in Aduni's novel, I really couldn't say I felt that much of a belonging to Ibadan, as it were. I just felt like this fly on the wall in Chief Aribagbo's home. But the story itself, I think, is hugely driven by the politics of Ibadan as we know it. The fact that, this man, there's this generalissimo who hires thugs, families are ruined based on the things he does with boys from these families, and the fact that anyone who is loyal to him has this huge political following. This hugely affects Chief Aribagbo's family, based on the fact that he felt, if I have allegiance to, if I'm loyal to someone like Chief Adedibu, I can do anything I want. But he ends up spending so much money and losing so much. He loses even his health to it. And from what we read in the newspapers, we know, Adedibu can be this kind of person who tells you this now and then does a volte-face later on. So I would say while Ibadan is in itself not a huge character in Aduni's novel, it drives the characters, and the characters in turn make us realize that, this is set in Ibadan, but this could have taken place anywhere else in the world. And I think that universality is the basic thing that matters with the story, not whether it is based in Ibadan or it is based anywhere else.
We have joining us now, Lala, I said well, Akidoju, and you've read The Secret Lives of Babasegi's Wives, which is also set in Ibadan. In that book, do you think that Ibadan came out more as a character?
because with every time that Ibadan was referred to, it was the city, it was where the civilization was, it was where the women looked forward to when they would talk about their younger days, and then when they moved to the city. It could have been Lagos, for example. It could have been maybe they were living in Ekpe, for example, and then they moved towards the Lagos Island. It could have been that. It didn't have to be Ibadan, but so I think the writer just chose to situate it there because a man like Baba Segi would, with his behavior, with his business, seemed to fit in the Ibadan environment better than So I would say that it stood out. There were certain places I've gone to Ibadan a lot, and so some markets that were mentioned in the book. There were areas, villages I've never heard of that I met for the first time. So it helped me, and I'll be looking out for them. But it brought me a little bit closer to the town, but not so much. The book wasn't not for at least not for me. It didn't take me through the streets of Ibadan, creating a scenery, or for me to just throw myself into that city. And for all the things that Ibadan is known for, it was really about the lives of the people in the story, so that they would tell their stories based on where they lived, or something that happened on the streets and all of that. So that's how that town. That's how it came.
Tell us a few things that you know of Ibadan that you'd have expected to have been expressed, to develop its character.
For example, I think Ibadan is an ancient city. You drive to Ibadan already, you're seeing the roofs, the brown roofs, on end, and I'm always like, oh my God, so beautiful. I would have liked to hear that, the scenery of the town, the landmarks in Ibadan, so that somebody can take a journey through the writer's mind, even without traveling there. Even though the last one, for example, the only thing we were told was that she went to university, she was a graduate. We didn't know if she went to UI. UCH was referred to, so I'm like, okay, so great UCH. But that was all. It wasn't what I'm saying is the reason UCH was brought in was not because the writer wanted to dwell on UCH or introduce us to UCH. It was about the characters in it. So I may have liked to hear some tales about the last twice experience on campus in that university, the great UI. I may have liked to see the zoo there, and those sort of, or the way the people on the streets behave, the market women, challenge, those things. A few of them were mentioned when the first one was talking about herself, but I wanted to enter into the town because I like the town. I really do.
So, you read Yacobian Gifted. So, is it really necessary to have information? Was it entertaining without having that?
I thoroughly recommend the book. I feel, I'll be honest, I was bullied into reading the book. And I used to be a much more voracious reader before my current job, and I think this has inspired me to definitely go back to more reading. But with all the struggles with time, and of course we all have that, and being someone who's lost speed with her reading, I think having gone through this book is a testament to how entertaining it is for me. I mean, my husband was teasing about how this will take me 4 years to read because he knows that I take forever. But I think the Yokobi Mill was extremely interesting. For someone who hasn't been to Cairo, I definitely, the book was very successful in letting me see Cairo. I could imagine going there on holiday. I could imagine going to eat out in a restaurant. I could imagine, doing the history trail and being a real tourist. I could feel that through the book. But it was much more entertaining for me to just the scandal, basically the scandal, all the gists, just a lot of scandal. A lot of scandal that also just makes you think, wow, we all have issues. We're all flawed, and we're all struggling, and we're all aspirational, and we're all we're all just very, very mortal as beings, and perhaps even more as city beings. Because I can imagine that the catastrophes and the confusion and gist basically that exists in the city is probably heightened than compared to the village. Again, I'm speaking from my own experience. I mean, I know how I feel when I go to my village. Nothing happens, absolutely nothing happens. When it's nothing happens in a very visible way. I'm sure there's scandal in the village, I'm sure. But then in the city, it's just much more colorful and much more exaggerated. And there's so much more narrative from third person. And when someone has told the story about what Lala did, by the time someone else is telling the story of the person that told the story of Lala, it's completely different. So it's an extremely exciting book, and just basically, I guess, exposes social dilemma and social society, which I think is heartwarming, and I think it's nice to keep seeing. And I think we'll probably talk a bit more about the theme. Obviously, as a woman reading the book, underneath all the scandal and excitement, I was also quite sad because a lot of the things that I saw through the female perspective in the book. Of course, I felt when I also read Baba Segi's Wives, and I felt when I read, Thousand Splendid Suns, and most of these books, where as a woman you just feel sad that we have struggles, and we struggle, whether we live in Cairo, whether we live in Afghanistan, whether we live in Lagos or Umuahia, it's all the same. So I recommend the book. I think please buy it.
Mr. Leda, did you enjoy Good Morning Company?
I must say that I came into the book with a different notion entirely.
Did you enjoy it?
Because the question of enjoyment would be to now pose the question if the kind of what I expected from the book, if those expectations were fulfilled. And from the point of view of the title, I would say no. But interestingly, coming from that young boy, seeing this whole country and trying to put words to the failure that was already beginning to happen, and hearing him, this failure from all the adults around him, and he sees his own parents, they are struggling, and this is a free nation, and you expect that, the expectations will be more than that. So from that point of view, to say I enjoy it would be to pronounce a lie, because the African story, there is practically little or nothing to enjoy in the African story as it is today. We can only enjoy the fact that we are successfully telling the story of the correctness of how this failure has come about. And to the point that our literature is not yet doing that successfully. We can only see the attempt at it. But of course, there is the whole question of coming back to the theme and say and ask ourselves, how does a writer makes a city a character? Or how does the city becomes something that you can directly feel in a story, beyond just the location and the setting just being something that is just there? Like she has pointed out, the Under the Rusted Roof is a story that if you take away, and take it away from it, you practically will not miss anything about the story. But yet, cities can tell their stories. But again too, cities are not something that are stagnant. The whole process of where the city is going, because the city is originally, or is becoming what is now being defined as an open space. But the truth is that cities are becoming closed gates. They are not becoming borders. If you are to use Lagos as an example, the whole idea of the mega Lagos is a closed gate. It's only open for business to come in and bring money into it.
The fact that the city is about people, it's about human beings, it's about what is happening to the lives of all these persons living in the city. But I think the challenge for this panel is to return back to the text and ask ourselves, which is the question that as writers or writers will have to take away, from this year's book fair, that how does the city becomes a character? How can we successfully tell the story of any city in relation to outside the expectations of those persons in the city? And to now begin to understand that all cities ultimately create walls to divide the people who live in that city, to deny them access of the city that originally ought to be theirs. And it is from that point of understanding that I say I think Onjaki has done a very good work for all of us in terms of Angola compared to a country like Nigeria is still a very young country, and to have a young character, look at this emergent failure, I think it's a big statement for the whole of Angola literature and for the whole of what to expect from Angola as events begin to develop. And I say this in all recognition of the entirety of the Arab Spring and the entire movement that we've had in North Africa, because we have talked of a book like the Jacobian building, and when you raise the question of the city, you talk of the city of Tunis, you talk of the city of Cairo, you talk of the general expectations after the entirety of all this mass movement. You look at the entire dispute between Christians and Muslims, the question of cohesion of how people live together, because these are central issues in the making of what cities are. Who owns the city? Can any group of individuals, can the city be indigenous to any group of individuals in relation to the fact that the city must be open to its people? Where do you end the definition of who are the people of a particular city? I think these are questions that we will expect stories to be able to tell successfully for all of us. And this for me is the challenge I took away from text itself.
Okay.
No, we did now. I don't know.
Brown rusted roof.
I think the main high point for me was seeing the story from where it started. There was a prologue where Chikariba goes with his father. He's a young man at that point in time, and his father is talking to him. He has so much hopes for him, and then we go into the story proper. The story starts with, I think, the second wife is about to give birth, and she's having this very difficult pregnancy. And then we go into the whole story, and everything starts to happen. The three wives are fighting over the fact that who will be the one to give birth to a lawyer first? Who will have the first lawyer? Who will have the first doctor? My children will be better than yours. The usual things people fight about in polygamous homes. And during the course of the story, one of the boys becomes a political thug. Of course, they say it is AD, but it is his personal decision to become a thug, despite all entreaties by family members. But at the end of it all, one son goes to the university, and even though Chikariba Boy himself did not become maybe a lawyer or a doctor as his father wanted him to, at the end, one of his children fulfills that legacy. So that for me was the high point of the story, that okay, where we started from, even though the future didn't seem so bright, at the end, everything was okay for the family. And sorry, just to add to the issue of we looking at the location of the story, outside the story itself, one thing that just occurred to me now is that apart from the title of Good Morning Comrades, yours is Jacobian building, has a Secret Lives of Obaseki. And as the reason says, under the brown rusted roofs. It just occurred to me that maybe they didn't even want to include the city itself. Maybe they wanted to take us out of the city and into this maybe intimate relationship with these characters outside the city. Just an observation.
I will agree with you there, because I by the way, I've read all 5 books, and the fifth one was Pickled Fish. Curious. But before we discuss all books together, Were there any high points for you and the secret lives of Baba Sadiq?
Most definitely. I think the high point that ran through the whole book, or that runs through the whole book, is the reckless abandon with which women talk about their secrets. There is no rules, but